First of all, thank you for asking me to come along. Always very excited to talk about our natives, especially our small-bodied natives. They tend to be a bit of a forgotten thing, and we've got some absolutely beautiful ones. So tonight I'll be talking about especially our live feed production and what a vital part of running a hatchery that is, not only to have healthy fry coming through, but especially natives. So a lot of our brood stock we capture from the wild, so we need to have a lot of different live foods on hand for them to be happy and healthy. So as you can see, our hatchery is not pristine. We have snails, we have algae, we have lots of stuff happening in our tanks. The reason is we want it to be as natural as possible because a number of the species that we breed have never been bred in captivity before, so we're learning as we go along. So we want to try and replicate their natural habitat, or at least, you know, we have lots of plants and that sort of thing. The other thing is we're actually completely off-grid, so everything we do needs to be low power consumption. So having natural aquariums and that sort of thing means that that balance is a lot easier to maintain. We also, because of that, I guess we do the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. So there's nothing complicated about what we do. Fish breeding isn't rocket science, it's just attention to detail. So, okay, so first of all, just going to work our way through the different stages of fry growth and production, I guess. So we start off with green water culture or algae. A lot of you here would use it the same. It's a fantastic first food, not only because of all of the macro and micro organisms in it, but I think it's also just the algae component is really important as a first food to get that gut flora happening and healthy. It's a bit like using colostrum for mammals. You know, I think it's vital, makes a huge difference to not only fry survival, but I think also their vigour, for sure. Secondly, we have our second food is rotifers. We have both saltwater and freshwater rotifers. Our saltwater rotifers we culture 365 days of the year. Freshwater rotifers, I tend to have a love-hate relationship with them. They tend to boom or bust, usually when I really, really want them. They're not happening, and then I can walk out into the paddock and there'll be a whole colony of them in one of the goat water troughs. So our third one is Artemia or brine shrimp, which pretty much anyone that breeds fish would be really familiar with. Then lastly, we get our fry onto artificial foods. So I guess my preferred food is the Otaheime brand. I just find that works really well for me. We also use freeze-dried decapsulated Artemia cysts. We find it's actually really easy to get your fry from live foods onto artificial foods, using them as that step in between because it smells the same, it looks the same, and they learn to take something that's not live. And then it's usually fairly easy to skip them across onto just your more freely available foods. These are some of the green water systems. So we actually have two ways of doing it. Out of season, I'll just have half a dozen 20-litre buckets. At the peak of the season, which will be soon, we actually have 3,000 litre tanks going with green water. The one on the left, that's about 14 to 16 days post-fertilisation. So this is our basic recipe for our 3,000 litre tanks. Now I think I sent So there'll be a number of recipes and things throughout the presentation, and I sent those through so they'll be accessible afterwards. So if you're looking for those recipes, they'll be there. Loosen chaff, oaten chaff, dynamic lifter. I use Aquasol concentrate, but really any liquid plant fertiliser, because that's what algae is. It's a plant. So if you're looking at smaller amounts, 20 litre bucket of aged aquarium, or if you've got goldfish, they're the best pooers in the world. So their water's fantastic to set up green water. Usually all you need is some Aquasol or something like that to kick it off. In the sun, or hydroponic lights are great, again, because they're for growing plants. So this is just a sample that I took out of quite an old green water system, and all the different goodies in it. There we go. So there's lots of different things. Now this was just in one that was set up outside. So we've got freshwater rotifers, copepods, ostracods, and some stuff that I have no idea what it is, but the fish seem to enjoy it. So if anyone knows, there's a funny little thing that's sort of like star-shaped, and I have no idea what those are, but lots of different sizes. And a little bit later on in the video, it actually shows little ciliates. But basically this is fantastic baby fish food. That's all we need to know. They think it's wonderful anyway. So, and a worm of some description. As I said, I'm good at breeding fish. I've no idea what a lot of these things are. There's just some slightly better photos of them. So copepods, daphnia, which a lot of people are aware of, and the ostracods at the end. If you know your macroinvertebrates, you probably tell me what sorts they are, but there might be one for Matt. So daphnia, and I saw some really good examples over on the trading table, they can get really quite large. So for us, we probably tend to use them more as a conditioning food for our small brood stock. They're great, easy to culture. They're probably a little bit big for some of the fry that we have, but they are a really valuable live food. Fry's second food, rotifers, freshwater and saltwater. I've tried a lot of different live foods in this space. I guess the micro worms, that sort of thing. As I was telling Matt on the way here, my biggest problem is if I have to do something every single day, I do it. If it's every few days or when it's needed, I tend to forget about it. So with the microworms and paramecium and stuff, I used to end up just with a smelly mess. So these guys on the left are actually freshwater rotifers, and you can see them feeding there. They're really quite amazing. And if you look at them in the water column when they occur naturally, they're sort of like a haze, and they're often a browny colour. And they are a brilliant feed for fry, and I don't think it matters what sort of fish you're breeding. They're a great size and really nutritious. The other guys on the other side are saltwater rotifers. What we're looking for to know that a culture is doing okay is the circular bit on the bottom of the rotifer is an egg. So what we want to see when we look at the sample under the microscope, we want to see at least 80% of them, hopefully, carrying an egg. Sometimes they'll carry 3 eggs. So that just means that your culture is healthy and producing well. So if you notice, I usually check my cultures about once a week. So if you notice that the amount of eggs percentage is dropping off, I think scientifically, you know, if you're solely reliant on rotifers, there's probably a calculation that you do to work it all out. But once you get used to what you're looking for, it's easy to see if a culture's starting to drop off. And if that's the case, then it's time to refresh your culture, which really is just straining out the rotifers that are there, giving them a good rinse and setting them up again. Because what can happen over time is you can actually get parasites come into the culture and compete for food, or they will actually consume the rotifers. So these are our buckets, which are just 20-litre buckets that are set up. This is our rotifer culture here. So this is what it looks like just I think it will keep playing, maybe not, just pre-harvest. So what you're aiming for is, by this stage, a little bit of colour in the water, and that's it. So that means you've got that feed and the amount of rotifers at a good level. So we just, again, use very simple 20-litre buckets. The contraption you can see there actually is bought from Reed. I think I've got it in my notes. But what it does is just help circulate the water around, collects the detritus and the waste that rotifers produce, just keeps the culture. So, and that's another reason. We usually have 3 or 4 buckets going at a time, and we're refreshing those once a week. So about every 3 weeks they're getting redone, and that seems to keep a healthy level going. These are harvested rotifers. That's usually use about a 40 micron mesh to harvest them. So the rotifers we use are the large strain rotifers. I have tried the small strain ones. I found the large strain rotifers to be a little bit hardier. Looking after the rotifers, the number one thing with rotifers is they're super sensitive to ammonia. So it is critical that you put some form of ammonia blocker or neutraliser in your water every single day. And again, feeding them, we feed a concentrated algae. It's not alive, it's actually a frozen product. We've tried a lot of different things. We've tried powders, we've tried growing our own live Nanochloropsis algae, and that's just a whole nother level. It's just another system you've got to keep going. So we've ended up with this one. It's great. You buy it frozen. What I normally do is thaw it out, decant it into ice cube trays, and then they go in the freezer. So you just bring out an ice cube at a time once you know what the volume is that your rotifers will consume. But again, number one thing to take home is they're super sensitive to ammonia. Third one, live food, is Artemia or brine shrimp. Probably most of you here have probably grown them or hatched them. These are our hatches. So in the peak, we'll have 5 or 6 of those going. So they're 8 litres. This is the amount that works for us. The thing that I find is that in 24 hours you'll probably get 60% of them to hatch. That extra 36 hours just makes a huge difference to actually the volume that you get through, and it can change what you think are perhaps poor quality eggs and leaving them that extra 12 hours, and suddenly you end up with 95, 96% hatch rate, which is brilliant because then you don't have to worry about eggshells and eggs going in with your fry. Don't have to worry about decapsulating, so it makes it much simpler just having that little bit of extra time. The thing that we also do is we reuse our rotifer water. So it runs at the same salinity as our brine shrimp. So the water that we strain off for the rotifers just goes into our Artemia hatches. So it's just that double use of water. This is just a little video showing different sizes between rotifers, brine shrimp, and the odd vinegar eel thrown in as well. It's not the best video, but it does show you the different sizes. And there's some with eggs, plenty there with eggs, which is great. We don't routinely feed vinegar eels, but they're my backup feed source in case catastrophe happens and I lose a culture or the brine shrimp don't hatch or something like that. We have enough going through that at least the fry can have something to eat for that 24 hours until we can get more brine shrimp hatching and that sort of thing. With the vinegar eels, we just harvest them and strain them through the 40 micron nets that we use as the easiest. You can also have them in the bottles where you have the cotton wool in the top, fresh water on top of the cotton wool, and they'll come through the cotton wool and be at the fresh water there, and then you can just syringe them off and pop them straight into your tanks. So some of the other live foods that we have, white worms, mealworms, freshwater shrimp, earthworms. Most of these are used for conditioning broodstock. I'm not sure how many of you know Rod Wubbin. Rod was nagging me for probably 2 or 3 years to give me a white worm culture, and I thought, no, because I'd used the micro worms, ended up a smelly mess, and I thought, not interested. So we went on one field trip and he actually handed them to me and said, here, take them home, you will thank me for it. And I thought, yeah. I did. They're wonderful. They're a fantastic food, especially for the pygmy perch. Great for conditioning, and I said you can scoop them out, pop them in water, they all ball up together and they're easy just to grab out with the tweezers. Our earthworms, we actually just have some of those worm farms that actually go in your veggie garden. So you just pop them in. It's great because they can come in and out. They don't get too hot, don't get too cold, and yeah, you have a fantastic, easy supply of earthworms. We use those mainly for our bigger, we have blackfish, so we use them for those. Any questions on the live food?
With the rotifers, the freshwater and saltwater, is it the same with both, with that egg, looking for the egg thing or the little circle?
So I've found about 3 different sorts of freshwater rotifers. So some of them are exactly the same, and the egg production is the same as between the fresh and the saltwater. The freshwater ones that I showed you on the screen there, I'm not sure how they reproduce, because I haven't, and nobody I've spoken to actually seems to know either. They just said, oh yeah, they're freshwater rotifers. So yeah, they're still a great food.
Anyone else? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, with the saltwater rotifers, you said to use a 40 micron net, and you also mentioned when you're refreshing your culture, straining the rotifers out and rinsing them. Now, I found the 40 micron net I wonder how big your one is, because I've got a small one and it's quite time consuming straining them.
It can be, especially if your water has a lot of waste in it, because it clogs up when you're trying. And all I can say is it's time consuming, and you've just got to keep gently spraying. Yes. There's no easy way of doing it, unfortunately.
How big is your net though?
So my nets are about that big.
Much larger than
Yep.
mine, so yeah,
Yep.
that would
Yep.
help. Thank you.
I'll try and remember where I got mine from. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris, how do you culture your whiteworms, please?
The whiteworms I just do in organic potting mix and coconut core. Yeah, about 50-50. I use a mix of Whiskers cat biscuits and also the bran that comes out of the mealworm boxes
Oh, yeah.
as well. Yep. So, yeah.
Chris, can you use sea salt to start the green water cultures, or is it a different type of liquid fertilizer?
No, I think you'd be able to.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
As I said, Aquasol is just the one that I used at the start, so I just keep using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Charlie Carp, anything like that works. Oh, sorry. There you go, mate.
Hey, Dulcie here. Is there live? So I only keep plecos. Excuse me. I only keep plecos and shrimp and cories, the little cories. So can you recommend a live food that'll stay in a column and a substrate that just keeps swimming around for fun?
Look, there's not many foods that are easy to culture that will stay alive a long time. So although even the saltwater rotifers, when you put them into fresh water, they will live for 6 or 8 hours. As far as something that I guess will maybe populate your tank and be there, probably blackworms are about the only thing that will live in your substrate and pop their heads up, and it's a good food. Yeah. So the next subject is just about dwarf galaxies that we've been breeding for about 4 years now. As Matt said, we are basically a conservation hatchery for our small-bodied natives, which all started when we bought our property and it was in a drought, and our creek, which happens to be called Middle Creek, we found some Flinders pygmy perch in there, and I contacted fisheries and said, what can we do with them? And the first person I spoke to said, you've got to let Mother Nature take its course. And I thought, I won't say what I thought, but no, that's not going to happen. So I kept ringing them and annoying them until I finally got hold of someone who replied to my email and said we could transfer them into one of our dams that still had water. So that sort of kicked off the fascination with our little natives, but also realised that most people didn't even know what our small natives were, especially in Victoria, because they're seen as quite dull and brown for those that aren't Victorian, which I will argue that we have some beautiful ones. But one of the onerous jobs, I guess, apart from my husband who has to do all the maintenance, and when I keep saying I need a different system, I need to change this or that, the biggest thing is permits. Permits. So from start, it can take up to 18 months for us to actually get permits to go out and collect wild brood stock. It has got easier over time, but you still have to jump through all the same hoops, and then you have to jump through them backwards when it comes time to release any captive bred natives. So there's lots of So quarantine coming into the hatchery, and then quarantine on the way out as well, to ensure that if there happens to be any parasites or problems within the hatchery, they're not transferred back out into the wild population. So yeah, it's a pain, but it's the only way. You can't fight the system, otherwise you'd never get anywhere. So you've just got to go with it, even if you don't necessarily agree with it all the time. So these are our dull brown natives. So these are gorgeous, gorgeous little fish. And honestly, that photo probably doesn't do them justice when they're in full spawning mode. And to the right is typical habitat. They also like it quite shaded. They like lots of overhanging trees. Where they don't have overhanging trees, any rushes, that sort of thing. Now, something that I guess is up for a bit of discussion is where they're found is usually the cooler, shaded, shallow areas. Now, we're not sure whether that's always been their preferred habitat or that's where they've been forced into, because a lot of the places they are found are also where Gambusia are. And of course, Gambusia are a rotten little pest fish and quite aggressive. They do a lot of fin nipping, do a lot of damage to our natives. So we're not sure whether they've been forced into these areas or it is where they would naturally have occurred anyway. Most of where we find them is less than 1 metre deep in water. This is capturing the brood stock. So this was, when we first started, this was our first collection at Turon Creek, so just at Mornington Peninsula.
Which creek, sorry?
Turon Creek.
Turon.
Yep. So on the left is some that we collected on that day. Then on the other side are actually from Cobblers Creek, which are down near Gippsland, that Glenn Briggs helped collect a number of these. So the ones at Cobblers Creek are the most genetically at risk. So they've got the least genetic diversity of all, but interestingly enough, with breeding the different lines, their fry are very vigorous, and I certainly haven't seen any difference with fry survival or anything like that. Here we have, just so you can see a little bit of behaviour with them. The females can generally get to nearly twice the size of the males. These are the habitat mops that we use. We were talking on the way down about the different types of habitat mop with the different yarn. Use all synthetic. The wool doesn't tend to last because of us having to disinfect them and wash them and that sort of thing. Colour is really important, I've found, with all the different ones that we breed. So green or brown is the preferred colours. But interestingly enough, when we first start the breeding season, we'll put a selection of mops in, so different colours and different types of yarn, because you'll find different tanks will actually prefer a particular mop. So then what I'll do then, from then on, is whatever their preferred colour is, that's the mop that goes in that tank.
That is very funny.
So yeah, they're very sort of in your face in the tanks, you know, for a fish that tends to be in shallow areas and hidden in dark areas. In the aquariums, they're quite happy to be at the front of the tank and quite visible. This is a This is showing just how aggressive the males can be with the females, and they keep at her until they drive her into the mops. Again, you can see how dull and brown those males are. There's no colour at all with them. But the males usually will only live for 12 months. The females, you can usually have 2 years and 2 breeding seasons. And I think this is why, because the males just never stop. And of course, there's often 4 or 5 males pursuing the one female, and they will just be going all day at different females, whereas the females, once they've spawned, they'll swim off to a quieter area. And but yeah, these guys just never stop. But you can see how they just force the females into the mops, and you can see my beautiful clean aquariums. Oh, there's snail eggs as well. And duckweed, yep, got to have duckweed. Yep. So this is the eggs on the different mops. The top one, the brown one, was actually 24 hours after we collected the Turong broodstock. So that's how quickly they settled in. They're actually quite a large egg compared to the size of the fish. So if you breed any of the blue eyes, very similar size, so probably nearly twice the size of rainbow eggs. So they're quite large for a small fish. It does have the advantage though that they tend not to eat their eggs because they're quite large compared to their mouths, which is a bonus. So we usually collect the mops 2 to 3 times a week out of the tanks, again because they don't eat their eggs, so there's not a huge rush to get the mops out every morning. Our general care, I guess, is they come straight out of the tanks. They go into tubs with methylene blue, just at the recommended rate. So if you see to the far left, they're fairly new tubs with the methylene blue. Then as we go across, what we do is, as soon as there's any sign of the eggs starting to hatch, which 2 things happen with the dwarf Galaxias. If you move the mop a little bit, the eggs, when they're nearly ready to hatch, will actually drop off the mop. So sometimes if you've got a white or a clear tub, you can see the eggs on the bottom. Or when they do hatch, the fry usually will stay on the bottom absorbing the egg yolk for about 24 hours. Sometimes it can be up to 2 days depending on the water temperatures. We just run a small sponge filter, small aquarium filters, heaters. We've found, so the dwarf Galaxias is actually a cold water species, so they will actually be laying their eggs in 7 to 8 degree water. That's their preference. At that temperature, it can take 18 to 20 days for the eggs to hatch. We found when we first started doing it, we were losing quite a lot of eggs with fungus during that time. So we played around a bit with the temperatures. If they were too warm, the larval stage, they died before hatch. So we found 14 to 16 degrees was optimum to still get all the fry through, the vigour, but very, very little fungus on the eggs. Once they've hatched, what we do is we just add green water to those. That's why you can see they're sort of greener, just a couple of litres at a time, and that will continue through until they're probably about 2 weeks old. We keep adding the green water. Then usually at day 4 or 5, we start putting the rotifers in. So we've got the fry. So these are about 48 hours post-hatch. So you can see how green the water is by that stage. And the beauty with having the green water in there is hopefully it provides food for 24 hours a day for them, but also it helps consume some of the ammonia that's created from the waste from them. Again, ammonia blocker, neutraliser is your best friend. I use it all the time in my fry tanks. The one that I've listed earlier on is safe. You can, use it well over its recommended rate, and the fry are fine. So the fry at about 24 hours old. The dwarf Galaxia and the little Galaxia have a very distinctive orange pupil. Apparently, I'm told that very few fish actually have that coloured pupil. Another one is tench, which is a bit of a pest species here, although we don't get a lot of them. And juveniles at about 8 weeks, they grow incredibly fast. Conservation releases, so these are some that we've done in Dandenong Creek with Melbourne Water. So part of the acclimation with them is just emptying a lot of water out of the buckets, putting the source water in where they're going, usually over about half an hour. Temperature is important, but something that is often overlooked is the pH. That will often be the biggest killer if you don't check your pH. So I think pH is much more important than temperature. Temperature might stun them to start off with, so it's really important that you get those right, especially with releases. McLeod's Morass, so this is down near Bairnsdale. This was a joint project. It was part of the Bellfrog conservation and enhancement work that they were doing. So what they actually did was they set up exclusion netting for the frogs and the tadpoles inside, because there's a lot of carp and eels and all sorts of things in the morass. And so we actually did some trials putting the dwarf Galaxias outside and inside the exclusion cages. And inside the exclusion cages, they did really, really well. And of course, because they're so small, there's no threat to the tadpoles. So it was a win-win situation. Not all smooth sailing. So the thing that we find, because again, a number of the fish that we deal with haven't been in captivity before, so there's not a lot known about what their requirements are. So we try and keep their feed as natural as possible and as balanced as possible, but sometimes we have issues. One of the things we've found out is a big one is susceptible to fungus. Now, we found that out the first time we collected broodstock. Within 24 hours, 48 hours of getting them home, a number of them shown signs of fungus. So what we do now is when we do collections, we have pre-made up buckets at 5 to 6 parts per thousand salinity and a product called Funginex. We add to it, so as soon as we catch the fish, they're put into these buckets and transported in that until we get home, and then part of our quarantine is they stay in that salt solution and Funginex for at least 5 days. Since we started doing that, we haven't lost anything with fungus. But if we're, so when it comes time to release, again, they're in that 5 parts per thousand salt. And if we're doing anything with the broodstock, sorting them out pre-breeding, again, they have that salt bath before they go back into their tanks. We had issues with not enough calcium, and what that was with our females going into that second year. So we had a number of them getting egg bound. So we lost a few from that. And so now all we do is we just have shell grit in the tanks, and that seems to be just simple, and it also helps buffer the pH as well. The odd one was iodine deficiency, and we couldn't work out what was going on. So that's actually their gills that are coming out the gill plate. And I was talking to a friend, Phil Littlejohn, and I said, look, I'm going to send you some photos. And I said, if it was any other animal, I would say it was iodine deficiency because it's like goiter. And he said, leave it with me. And he contacted me about an hour or so later. He rang back. He goes, yep, that's what it is. It's iodine deficiency. All you need to do is add iodide to the tanks. So that fish looks pretty terrible. 5 days, and it was back to normal. So now we actually just add sea chems iodide to the tanks about once a fortnight, just at the recommended rate for saltwater aquariums, and we haven't had any issues at all since then. Yeah, conservation. Nobody can do it on their own. You know, we have a fantastic network of predominantly volunteers that, you know, I give the call out and they come, and we spend a day getting wet, cold, miserable. So look, yeah, definitely couldn't do it without these guys. So yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Oh, I've already done that.
Is there any questions for Chris on the, yeah, I'll start up the back with Sarah.
Just a question regarding the tubs that you use for raising fry. How big are they? How many litres?
10 litres. Yep.
How you going? Those tubs with green water, do you aerate them? And at night when the green water might be taking in the oxygen?
Yep, so even the 3,000 litre tubs have aeration 24 hours a day. Not a lot, but just enough to keep the water turning over.
So slightly unrelated to the presentation, you mentioned that you keep blackfish. So first of all, do you breed them? Yeah. So
Trying to
Yeah.
breed them.
because you never hear of anyone breeding them. So like, there's obviously some freshwater fish. It's just not possible to breed them in captive conditions. So I guess the next one is: are they in a tank or in a pond?
So the blackfish are in tanks. They're in 300 litre tanks.
Yeah.
We had 2 spawnings last season. One was successful until I didn't get it right.
Yeah.
So we had about 40 fry hatch, and what happened was I actually had them in those smaller tubs and went to Melbourne for the day. We had an out of season hot day. They got too warm and they all died. So there was an awful lot of beating myself up over that one. The second lot actually weren't fertile. So those fish we only had for about 2 months before they spawned. So this year we've had them for a full season. They're much older. We've been able to sex them, pair them up. So we'll be giving it another go soon.
So hopefully, like in a year's time, maybe we'll get a presentation about breeding the blackfish.
Sure. Yep.
All right, question from me, because obviously most of the people in this room are keeping glass boxes with fish in them. Temperature range for the Galaxias, the dwarf Galaxias that you've been showing us?
So they're definitely a cold water species, and once temperatures hit 18 degrees, they stop breeding. So that sort of gives you some idea of the upper limit. I have them out in 3,000 litre tanks as well as indoor aquariums. So our hatchery is just a tin shed where they are with some laser lights. So it's open to the extreme. So it gets down to about 6 degrees, which they're really happy at that. Once you get to the mid-20s, they're not so happy about it. So I think you certainly have them inside in ambient temperatures, but not a heated tank at all. They would not like tropical temperatures.
That's why I was wondering, you said you put heaters in.
Yep, so the heaters are set just so that they maintain it at between 14 and 16 degrees. Yep, and that's for the fry. Yeah, the adults definitely prefer it cooler than that if possible.
Sorry, coming.
Thank you. As well as the dwarf Galaxias, you also breed the little Galaxias, is that right?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
So up until a few years ago, it was believed they were the same species until Rhys Coleman, he's at Melbourne Water now, he actually took x-rays of them and found that, now I've got to get this right, the dwarf Galaxias have an extra vertebrae in their spine, so then they are seen to be two different species. So the boundary is sort of, I guess, Melbourne, pretty much. So Geelong, so from Geelong east is the dwarf Galaxy, and then the other way is the little Galaxy. So, but we're just breeding the little Galaxy for the first time this year, and they're exactly the same. So far, everything that we do for the dwarfies is working for the littles. So.
Do you notice any difference in their behavior or anything? You know, you're starting to get to know the two and go, oh yeah, now I can tell the difference.
No, which is why they're at completely different areas, because no, I think if I was to say anything, the little Galaxies are paler. They're not as pretty as the dwarfies, but I'm not sure whether that's just because the dwarfies are, you know, our local ones. So, but yeah, just looking at them in tanks, it would, very difficult to tell them apart.
Cool, thanks. You like the microphone?
What are some of the criteria for how release sites are chosen?
So generally the release sites are combined with the project. So one of the catchment management authorities will come to me and say, are you interested in breeding this fish? And if I say, yep, let's go, they usually have places that they would like to put them. So usually it's areas that have been revegetated, pest predators have been taken out. Often it's what we call a surrogate site. So what that means is it's often a contained area. So that can be a farm dam or I guess sort of a wetland area that doesn't get inundated. But having said that, I guess the positive thing with captive bred fish, if we release them and say only 50% of the sites are successful, we haven't actually taken wild populations and put them at risk, if that makes sense. So we're probably getting a little bit more adventurous now and putting them in places that perhaps aren't ideal, and it's surprising sometimes where we think it's perfect isn't that successful, and then others we put them in and you think, well, we'll give it a chance, and they just go gangbusters. So
Chris, sorry. Just use this one, mate. Thank you.
Chris, I'm interested on the financial side of it. Do you operate as a commercial breeder, or are you under grants, or how does it work?
So commercial, basically. So sometimes if it's a new fish that we haven't bred before, there's an amount that the CMAs will actually pay me to basically to house that fish for 12 months and try and get it to breed. Once we successfully breed, then it swings over to a per fish price. So I get paid for what I produce. So we don't get any government grants of any sort.
So it's your income has to be what you release, and somebody's paying you for that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And also, so usually once we're successful with the breeding of them and we've fulfilled our requirement to whoever has approached us to start off with, which usually it's 3 years, usually at the end of that 3 years, then we're able to supply the aquarium industry and private people and that sort of thing, which now most of the ones, apart from the little Galaxias and the flat-headed Galaxias, are actually available for people to get.
So you were saying that some of your fish are sensitive to temperature. How do you deal with heat in summer?
Aeration. Yep. And also just, so we have shaded tanks, we have our inside area, we also have a warm room, which is just made out of cool room panelling. So any that, I guess, are more sensitive in the winter, but love it hot, they're in that warm room because we have a huge big window that faces north, and then inside we have glass sumps that heat up. So usually, it's good.
All right, folks, and just so you're aware, obviously, in a sense, our sister club in the southeast is ANGFA, and Chris and a lot of the members here, I myself am a member of ANGFA, so it is a great club. They do a lot in the conservation space, and you'll learn a lot about the native environments and things like that we have present in the area. So join their club, get along, and enjoy their meetings as well. It's a good time to be had. So can we thank Chris for her time, please, folks?